everyone, today I'm going to show you how to make a circular knitting machine tote bag like this one right here for the larger machines. This bag is going to have about a 16-inch diameter at the bottom, and we're going to have sides tall enough so that you can fit those machines in there securely and use it to travel if you're going to be traveling to use your machine, or even as a storage bag. Now, I'm using a pattern that I created. So this pattern, if not now, will be available on Etsy soon after testing is done. But in this case, it will have the template pieces that you'll need for the bottom and the sides. And then you'll just need to have, if you want to add a drawstring, which I highly recommend, something for the drawstring, and then also the fabric for the straps. So like with all digital patterns, if you're going to follow the pattern or just follow along, very important that you just print the first page and make sure that it fits in that square. So in this case, it's a 2-inch square. So we just want to make sure that that is accurate, because that's going to ensure your shapes are going to be the right size. After that, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to cut out the pieces, and with the dotted lines, you're going to line them up and tape. So the paper is pretty, depending on your paper, it should be pretty sheer, and you're just lining the grid up. So you're making sure that this line you can see it and this line you can see it. And then you're just going to tape it right there. And then in this case, you're going to cut around the circle, and then also here, because you're going to place this circle on the fabric line. And then you do want to cut close to the outside black line to have the most accurate size. So for my fabrics, I'm going to use some of these denim legs. I was gifted these from a local amazing vintage shop. Summer over at Vita Luxe gave these to me, and I've been, trying to figure out a great use to upcycle them. So we're going to use these to make our bag today. But you can also use any sort of canvas, duck cloth, any sort of thicker fabric for the outer is going to work best, because you do want it to have some durability. And since this is the bottom, even though it does have stains and a little distress on there, it doesn't matter because it is the bottom of the bag. Now you're also going to do the same thing for the sides of the bag. For this bag, we are going to do 51¼ inches long by 10 inches high. So you can use the pattern if that is easiest for you, or you could just cut out a rectangle with those dimensions. But the size is important because it needs to fit smoothly around the bottom of our bag. And then here is the sides of your bag. So this is the pattern piece. You'll see it should measure here 51¼ So you may need to adjust if your taping is a little bit off. Now, depending on how you're going to be cutting out this pattern piece, you can then fold this piece in half and then just cut it on the fold. But this way you have the full length. So if you wanted to do some patchwork, you certainly can do that and just have this full piece as a reference. So now we have our 2 rectangle pieces. These are the sides of the bag. And I did end up doing this denim patchwork. So I just patched it all together and then cut out my shape. Again, it's going to be the exact same length as this piece right here. This is going to be our lining. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to turn our lining into a tube. So we're just going to fold it in half with right sides together, pin or clip those sides. Same thing with our outer. And then we're going to stitch both of these together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now we have our tubes essentially. So this is going to be the side of the bag. This is going to be the lining. And then this is another tube. This is going to be the side of our bag, which is going to be the outer piece. So now what we're going to do is we are going to attach the outer sides to the centerpiece. One optional thing that you can do if you want your bag to be a little bit sturdier, maybe you want something more basket-like, or you want it to be pretty sturdy, you can add a fusible fleece. You can add some sort of interfacing just to give it a little bit more body. For me, I am comfortable with the denim being the thickness and the stiffness that I'm looking for, but this is where you would actually apply that interfacing to your outer pieces before you actually connect these two together. So when we're connecting our two pieces together, if you've ever tried to put a circle piece with another piece, it can be a little bit of a pain. So what we want to do is we're going to put right sides together. So let's make sure that that is facing up. So we have right side, and then this is our right side. And you can certainly just go right around and pin it all the way around, and then stitch, cross your fingers, and hope for the best. You can definitely do that. And I know that works really well for some people. However, if you're just starting out, you might get really frustrated with all of the puckers. When you get around to the end, you might find that there's a whole bunch of fabric left over. And so what we need to do is we need to ease that circle, okay, that curved edge to the straight line. And you can do that by, number one, if you just want to go around and pin your pieces together and then just adjust so that that is spread out evenly throughout the piece, that's one option. Or one great tip that I learned is if you quarter your piece. So in this case, I've already pressed it in half. That was when I was doing this. So you can quarter it, you can do more than a quarter, but essentially what we're doing, we're gonna line up these corners here, these center pieces. So right now we are lining up the center of our circle. So this should be a perfect half circle. We're gonna come over here to the right side, do a little finger press just to make an indentation there. And then we're gonna place a pin right there, which is gonna indicate to us that that is the corner. We're gonna do the same thing on the other side. Again, give it a little finger press there. Take another pin and mark that side. Now we already have these pressed, but I want to show you. So we're going to now align those two pins together, which should give us a perfect half circle. And let's just go ahead and put two more pins in, just to demonstrate the whole process. Again, you do not have to go through all of this, but I will say your bags will turn out so much nicer if you take the time to really ensure that they fit together. All right, so now when we open this up, we have 4 designated spots. You also, if you want to get really, really technical with it, now you could fold those in half and mark that corner as well, and then end up with a few different places, which will make it easier to ease your pieces together. Okay, but we're not done. We need to do the same thing on our other piece, so our side pieces. So we want to start, we already have a seam here. If your piece is a single piece, this is going to be a little easier. So we know that our seam is one side. So when we pull that rectangle and flatten it out, right, this is going to be another little spot here that we're going to place a pin. Then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up and we're going to align this pin with the seam. Okay, once again, flatten that out, do a little finger press down there, and then pin. Now I know some of you are going to go and just stitch these together, and maybe once you stitch them together you get a little frustrated. You can come back and just try this technique, because I will tell you it's really great too if you're trying to put in sleeves or anything with a curved edge. I did this when I was working on my witches hats last year, and it made a huge difference. All right, so now we have 4 points identified on this piece with the flat edge, and then we have 4 points identified on the curved edge. Now, one other little tip you can do, which I have found to be super helpful, is to go around your circle and cut into it a little. That's going to give it a little bit more stretch if necessary. Make sure you don't cut into the seam allowance. We're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this piece. Little cuts in here. Again, be mindful that you are not cutting past that 1/2 inch seam allowance of the circle. So now let's see this magic in action. So you're gonna start by taking one pin with the flat edge, one pin with the round edge, and again, right sides together. So you should have this right side looking at you and this right side facing down. We're gonna put those together, take out one of the pins, and pin that together. Then we're gonna do the same thing with the next pin. In this case, we're just using the seam. We didn't have a pin here, but we will find where this pin is, line up the seam. There we go. Take that through, pin it in place. And we'll do that for the other two as well. So now we have our lining and our bottom piece pinned at 4 quadrants. So now we're just going to ease the quadrants. Instead of trying to ease the entire circle, this will make life easier. It's also why some people do like doing more than 4, especially for the larger pieces. So we are going to slowly, and I'm just going to use clips for this. We're going to slowly align these pieces. So you can see already. So see where that is? There's a lot of material left over here. If you were just to go in and stitch this together, you're going to get a pucker. And that may be fine for you, but I'm going to tell you that frustrates me to no end. In fact, let's go ahead and use some pins because that's something that you probably want to do if you are just starting out. It does keep things in place a little bit more secure. Again, there's no harm in putting more pins than you think that you need. And then I tend to pull it, since I know that the bottom circle is going to have it's going to be a little bit bigger and it's going to tend to pucker. I am going to just pull the top one a little bit tauter as they go around. So we're back at that next pin right here, and look, there's no puckers at all. And so we just kind of place that in as we went around. Now I'm going to continue to do this all the way around our piece. And here we are back at that beginning. There we go. So now there's a lot of pins in here, but I promise you this will make a huge difference with preventing puckers. This is our lining, and for this bag, I actually tend to put an insert in there, like a cardboard insert, just to give it a little bit more stability at the bottom. So this to me doesn't really matter, but I wanted to show you that this is a great technique to have in your bag of tricks for so many different reasons. You're also going to then do the same thing with your outer. Now, when sewing the two pieces together, this is the bottom and then we have the sides underneath. And what this is going to do is it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of control where that puckering is. So it does take time and you are going to need to use both hands. But this is the method that I use, and again, you can do what works best for you. But I always gently just make sure that is tucked under as I'm going, and I have my sewing machine marked with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. It makes it easy so I can kind of follow the curve as I go. And then you're going to, here, as you sew, you can keep your finger kind of touching here, and you can make sure that there's no puckers. You can feel them. So see how the fabric is puckering just a little bit there. As we start to sew, we can keep an eye on it, so no puckers. When you get to the next little pin here, just make sure you tuck that under, flatten it out here, and then pull out the pin, hold it in place, and then continue. Then every time you get to a pin, just readjust. And then just, you'll feel there's some puckers there. And yes, this process does take a little bit longer, but I will tell you, I have way less frustration with a lot of puckers in my items when I do this method. Now we're getting close to the end. So now I can put my finger all the way from here to here and there are 0 puckers, okay? So now, finish off by back stitching. And look at this, I'll give it a little press, but there is not one pucker in this join. So it does take a lot more time, but you will get very beautiful results. After it's been pressed, that beautiful lining piece. Okay, so that's our lining. And then here is our outer. And I also did not have any puckering with the denim, even though I didn't do that other method. And that I think is just because the rigidity of the denim made it a lot easier. And I did do a press on that as well. So before we actually attach the lining, we need to do the straps. In the pattern, I don't give you a template for it because honestly, with straps, you can adjust these as much as you'd like. I suggest 3.5 inches by 20 inches. So what I mean by that is if you cut out, and this is not to scale, but I just wanted to show you what the instructions would say. So let's say this is 3 inches and it's about 20 inches here. So if this is the strap that you're working with, what I suggest doing, and I'm not doing it with the denim because it's so thick. So let me show you what I suggest doing and then what I'm doing for this piece. So in the directions, what I suggest is to fold over your fabric in half, give it a good press, and that's going to be your center line. Once you have that center line, now you're just going to go back and you're going to press each of these pieces in on this side, each of the pieces in to that center crease like this. Then the last thing you're going to do is fold it over like this and then edge stitch to connect it. And this creates a very sturdy strap, even if you're using just cotton. Again, this denim is too thick for that, and I want to use the denim straps to go with the upcycled denim. So what I'm doing, and again, another option for you depending on what fabrics you have around, I have cut this the same thing. This one I cut by 3 inches instead of 3.5 inches because all I'm going to do is I pressed it to create that center seam, and then I'm going to do an edge stitch all the way down here to connect the piece, and then I'm going to turn it right side out, press it, and then I'm just going to do some top stitching. And that will give me a pretty thick strap still. I think I'll still have about a 1 1/4 inch strap, which is a good size. And since this denim is already pretty sturdy, it doesn't have any stretch in it. By the way, all the denims that I use, I typically use 100% cotton with no stretch. However, if it's something that I've been gifted, there may be stretch in some of them, but I chose a piece that did not have stretch in it. So that's how I'm going to make my straps here, and then I'm going to show you how to attach them to the bag and sew on the lining. So now we are on step number 4, which is to attach the straps. This piece right here, I have a lot of seams. So I'm just gonna pick any seam right here that has 3 inches on each side. These are gonna be the 2 sides that the straps are going to go on. But let me show you, because this is probably what yours is going to look like. Turn this out here. So to clarify the step, on the outer piece, so I'm just showing you on my lining piece, but on the outer piece, you're going to find where your seam is, and then you're going to measure over 3 inches. I find that this is a good placement, but this is one of those things that you can absolutely alter depending on how you like your straps. So 3 inches on this side is right here. So what I would do is I would take my strap, line it up here, and then I would pin it in place. And then I am going to end up basting this, okay? And then same thing on this side, we're gonna measure over 3 inches. Line that up there. And then baste that in place. Then to get the other side placement, all you're going to do is take your piece, okay, pull it like this, and then this is going to be your center. You can clip that if you want to make sure it doesn't move. And then you're going to take your other straps and you're going to line them up on this side, just so that they align. And this is going to give you a perfect alignment with your straps. So this is how you would attach your straps before putting the lining in.
if you had just one seam. I'm gonna do the same actual process, but I'm gonna use it on my outer fabric. I just wanted to show you with the lining because yours might look a little different. Also, keep in mind if you have a bad and a good side of your strap. And what I mean by that, so my straps, I actually hid that seam on the inside. So I want it to be on the inside. Now, okay, I'm gonna point this out just because I always wanna be real with you. I got stuck on the fabric that was in, I wasn't paying attention, and it did a little curve right here. I'm not gonna take the time to fix that. It really doesn't bother me, but I did wanna point that out, that things happen all the time. So I have my bad side facing here because once we put the lining in, our strap is going to be up like this. And then I'm going to do the same thing that I just showed you with the other piece. I'm just going to make sure, and these seams aren't going to line up perfectly, but I'm going to put that there, clip this together since that is the center. And then I'm going to put the other side straps together. And then I'm going to baste these in place. And what I mean by baste, if you are new to stitching, essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack them in place. I'm going to come in here and go over the seam allowance on each of these 4 before I put it in the lining, just so it doesn't shift. Because what can happen if you don't actually baste them in place? Let's say you're stitching and you accidentally get it caught on something and it becomes crooked. Then when you turn it right side out, now you're going to have a crooked strap. So this just ensures that you're going to have that nice, really solid strap before you add your lining. All right, so now what we are going to do is we are going to attach our lining. Now, one thing I wanted to point out to you, there are 2 options for the lining, for turning the lining, depending on what you're doing. For this piece right here, I stitched all the way around. So I have 2 options. I can either remove about a 3 to 4 inch section of stitching here so that I can turn it right side out, or I could leave a space up here at the top for turning it inside out. I'm going to be doing a top stitch on here anyway, so I could do that. However, I find it so much cleaner to turn from my lining. So this is something that when you are stitching the circle together, if I wasn't so distracted showing you the technique to get the nice perfect little circle here, I would have remembered to remove those stitches. So I am just going to go in, and it's all curved, so it really doesn't matter where. And I'm going to do, that should be big enough to get my hand into. So that's what you're looking, is a hole big enough to get your hand into. I'm going to go back to my machine and I'm going to reinforce the stitches at the beginning and end right here. And then I'm going to pick out all of these stitches here just to leave that opening. All right, so now this makes more sense. We have our little hole right here in the lining, again, reinforced at both sides so it doesn't come undone. And what we're going to do is we are going to leave the lining facing this way. And we're going to place the right side. So your bag is right side out, right? We have it looking like this. Then we have our lining, and we're going to place this bag inside our lining. It'll make sense in a second. But we are going to line up that center seam. So in this case, I'm going to turn it around just a little bit. So we have the center seam from our lining, and we also have the center seam that is right between those straps. So that should be equidistant. And we're going to pin that in place. And then you're just going to go all the way around, pinning this in place. You don't need any special tricks or tips for this. Everything should line up because the measurements should be exact if you followed the pattern. And then as you are pushing your bag in here, just make sure that those straps are in that down position and they are not crooked. Even though we basted them in place, there is a possibility that they could get crooked. We just don't want to see that happen. So now what we're gonna do is we are gonna use, again, that 1/2 inch seam allowance. If you want your bag to be a little taller, so this bag right here, in fact, let's go ahead and just take a look really fast. So the Sentro 48 pin is a little bit bigger than our Addi. So let's just go ahead and stick this in and check our sizing. So when we stitch this together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, it's going to be a pretty close fit. So there's not going to be a lot of extra space up here at the top. And for me, that's the way I wanted this particular bag to fit. So in this case, if you wanted to adjust that seam here, and maybe instead of doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you certainly can do like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just make sure that when you go around and stitch this together, you do reinforce stitch where those straps were basted in place, and just go over those a few times. And then this is what I'm actually going to be putting in this bag. So then this is how the Addi will actually fit in here. And again, with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, we're still going to have a really nice snug fit. But if you wanted it to be shorter, you could just increase that seam allowance. If you plan on putting a drawstring. With the other 2 bags that I did, for example, in this bag right here, and then the Mushroom House bag as well, I did add this drawstring here to the top. So I made the bag, I kept it a little bit taller so that I could add a ribbon and just keep it a little tighter. And that's because I'm really klutzy, and if I have this like in my arm and I bend over, it will come sliding right out. So we just want to make sure that, and yes, right, you could always tie your straps together. So that didn't happen, but you can also add a drawstring, and that is part of the, it's in the instructions as well if you wanted to add a drawstring. So I'm gonna use the 1/2 inch seam allowance just because that for me will work for both machines. So now we've stitched all the way around the top, and I'm not gonna cut off the seam allowance. You certainly can do that if you want to. We are gonna top stitch it closed, so it's really up to you if you want to, but I tend to leave it. And we are going to find that little opening that we have right here in our lining. And we are going to pull everything through that lining. Again, be gentle even though you reinforced it, because sometimes stitches can still pop. So we're just going to gently pull our bag right side out. So let's just double check our straps, make sure that they are straight before we seal up the bottom seam. Yep, that basting makes a huge difference. All right, and then before we give this a press and then top stitch to finish, we are going to come back here and we are going to make sure that our edges are folded under. Since mine had already been pressed when I had originally done this, I'm just going to follow that same press line here. All right, so then we're just going to do an edge stitch. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to back stitch and stitch as close to the edge, getting both sides as possible, and then back stitch here as well. And that will seal up this seam. It is a little visible from the inside, but I'm going to use this a very similar color, so it's not going to be super noticeable. All right, so here is our final pressed bag, again, with just that little edge stitching around the top here. And then this is the lining. Here's where that little hole was. Again, nice and seamed up and all hidden in here. So I decided to add a drawstring just since this bag needs to fit 2 different things. And then also I'll be able to use this for other things if I decide to. So again, right between where the seam is, between those 2 straps, I went back and forth about 4 times here to reinforce, and then I measured here, right, so that this goes through the casing. It should seamlessly go through. And then I also reinforced about 4 times right here. So then we just need to come in here, and we're just trying to find a couple of stitches. Now don't force it, you don't want to rip the fabric. And then once you do one, the rest of them start to kind of come unraveled pretty easily. Now you don't want to go through the lining here. So we don't want to pick through those stitches. We're just picking through these stitches up here. Just need to get one more over here. And then to add our drawstring, take your safety pin, make sure it's a safety pin that'll fit through that casing. And then you're just going to push it in. And then as you push the fabric with your left, you're going to push the fabric, grab the safety pin, and pull it while you're pushing with your right. what I did for my mushroom house bag. So the medium size that I have in the pattern will fit the adorable little mushroom house like this. And so what I did with this one when I was doing a little test is I added a piece of cardboard. So this was a piece of cardboard. I just took 2 pieces of scrap fabric that I had, stitched the fabric on, and then I added a little ribbon to make it easy to come out. So if you've ever used any of those fabric boxes to store things, a lot of times they'll have a cardboard bottom. And then this way you can take this out and replace it if you need to. You could also, instead of using cardboard, if you don't have any, although, you know, who doesn't have cardboard? So much of it ends up in the landfill. Why not use it for something crafty? But maybe you have an old piece of plastic from packaging you got. You have an old cutting board, like a lightweight cutting board. They also make craft plastic to cut out templates for like quilting. So if you have anything around your house that you can cut the diameter of the bottom just using that template piece, you can do something like this. So this is what I may end up doing for this bag here. But you'll see this, it's not the right size because this goes for the medium bag, but this is what essentially what you would do. You would stick this inside the bag and it just gives it a little bit more support. Right, so I've cut this piece of whatever you call this really thick laminated paper, and I hot glued the ribbon right here. I'm not going to cover it because I think that it actually works just perfectly. And we're just going to put it side of our bag, just making sure that it's at the bottom. That is our base. Put our machine right in there. She sits nicely. And then we have the drawstring that I did end up adding. And now we have our perfect little travel tote, and we can pop in our little accessory kits, some yarn, some projects working on. There we go.